Given that I made a video on whether we would see Doc Ock again in the MCU, the Raimi version, I figured it would only be appropriate to also do the same thing with Norman Osborn slash the Green Goblin, who appeared in the Spider-Man Raimi trilogy as the main villain of the first film and then had these hallucination appearances or cameos in the second and third film before returning in No Way Home as the main antagonist. One of the problems the MCU has had since it started is pretty subpar villains. Now, they can be considered bad for a variety of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is just showing up one time or having a less prominent role in proportion with what they are in the comics, right? So, for example, a lot of people don't like that we get this fake version of the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, a trick version of the supposed archenemy of Iron Man, and then we actually get the real one. It's only after Iron Man's no longer, a factor in the series. Same thing with Captain America, where Red Skull's in the first movie, and after that they just never meet again. Really, the only Marvel character of the ones who've had like their own book for the last 50, 60 years, in the MCU, had their archenemy kind of treated with any sort of reverence, was Loki. But even that is still not accurate to what we had in the comics, where Loki just remains evil. And part of the antagonism between him and Thor is that one is strong and smart, the other one is smart but also very strong in the way of mystics, and just kind of like whether whose intelligence can take out the other ones. Basically, with him, his significance in the MCU is more tied to a transition from villain to hero, kind of like with Nebula, versus like staying there and kind of building up that antagonism. And the role that they gave Goblin in No Way Home was so unusual, in the sense that you have this crossover villain, this villain from another film series, who you allow to take the biggest and most significant destruction of Peter's personal life. I mean, we're going into this thinking Mysterio is Peter's archenemy for revealing his identity, and then he gets one-upped by Goblin taking out Aunt May. But after having him do this very serious, very destructive, life-altering thing to Peter, you just poof him away in a puff of smoke. And again, I've talked about this in the other video. I know a lot of people feel like if you use a villain too many times, it's going to get repetitive. And it's like, yeah, well, I don't necessarily feel that way. You can always have a villain in a movie and give them a different role than what they had before, right? So like if you have, for example, this second trilogy of Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, and throughout the trilogy you have this variant of Dafoe's Goblin, who's kind of like in the background, lurking in New York City, plotting things either against Kingpin or, commissioning some other villain they created. He could be in that film for 2-3 scenes, just kind of running the show behind the scenes, and it would still be different from his role in No Way Home, where he's a direct physical threat to Spider-Man. Because the purpose of having him in a succession of movies in a smaller but still plot significant role is to build up that antagonism, to have him be a lingering presence, so that when you get to either the sixth and presumably final film of Tom Holland's solo Spider-Man movies, you can have him face the Goblin again. Or if you want to have that be something else, you can have them face each other again in Secret Wars. And there's such an organic nature to having Dafoe's Goblin return, in that during the finale of No Way Home, you have Peter trying to kill Goblin and getting stopped by his alternate counterpart from the Raimi universe. And a lot of people, they're like, oh, this was such a great moment because it was a redemption for Raimi Spider-Man, because he was able to save Norman, and he wasn't able to do that in the original 2002 film. But really, for Holland's version of the character, it's not a great moment for him. And if you allow for this trilogy or these several movies, or we don't know the extent of how much longer Holland's going to be in the MCU as Spider-Man. It's apparently at least going to be a trilogy, and then 2 appearances in Avengers movies, Doomsday and Secret Wars. If you allow for Holland's version of the character to have a rematch with Dafoe's iteration of the Goblin. It could be in the sixth movie of his own solo films or in Secret Wars. To have this one-on-one battle where Holland's character is calm, is just completely, he's upset obviously at seeing the a version of the person who killed his aunt, but if he's allowed to fight the Goblin by himself and defeat him, but then at the same time still not try to strike him or kill him, that would actually be a very full circle moment for his character, because it would show that he has matured since their first encounter, and would also just basically reveal that we have a version of the character who's very level-headed in dealing with these threats, and he's gained experience over the course of his appearances. I think one of the things that really handicapped Holland's first appearance as Spider-Man is that their approach, Kevin Feige and the rest of these people, they believed that with the MCU Spider-Man being the third live-action iteration of the character, they were like, oh, well, we don't want to use villains that we've already seen before, so no Goblin, no Doc Ock, no Electro, no Lizard. And this was really an unfortunate way of thinking, because a lot of people do not like the iteration of Lizard from the first TASM. A lot of people do not like the iteration of Sandman from Spider-Man 3. Just it's one of those things where I don't believe any studio should ever try to look at something else and say, okay, well, this has just been done before, so we're not even going to try to like correct it, do our own version of it. Because if you have a Spider-Man trilogy that keeps the Goblin alive and just as this lingering presence, maybe 5-10 minutes of screen time across 3 different movies, just in the background, ordering different villains around, creating different villains with Oscorp, that's an idea that really extends to the antagonism of Peter and Norman, which would culminate in them seeing and fighting each other again at some later point, presumably when you want Holland to stop playing the character. What's so unfortunate is that people say, oh, well, if you have Norman in the MCU, and Peter knows that name, he's gonna know what it's gonna lead. It's like, yeah, but if it's a variant of Norman who survived some alternate version, this is what one of the things we talked about with these multiverses. You can just kind of pull any scenario from out of your behind. But if it's a version of Norman who survived an alternate version of the events of No Way Home without, having his Goblin side, cured in quotation marks, you could very easily have it revealed that he found a way to either get Strange's spell machine or was able to create his own devices to teleport between universes. And in this transfer over to the MCU proper, he would have some alternate identity, which is not something that is above Norman Osborn doing, that he could use to facilitate the creation of other villains through some company with an alternate name. So all of these things would be a way of easily explaining why he could work in the shadows and just not be detected by Peter. So like I said, the MCU, it's a series that a lot of people admit is past its prime. Right after Endgame, it just started to dwindle and it's just not as well received as it was before. We don't have to get in all the specifics here, but one of the things that it has been complained about and attacked since its inception damn near are these relatively weak villains who are oftentimes derided for having minimal characterization, not being very threatening. And this has plagued the series since it started. With having a variant of Goblin who sticks around and is a lingering presence, or at the very least is some kind of continued force that just permeates through a plurality or a majority of MCU Peter's future appearances, you can help to correct that error, at least for this one particular franchise, which the MCU is going to need to rely on more and more because these other characters that they have are not winning people over. It's the best way to put it. And I guess I want to just kind of leave with this thought. Imagine if we get this second Holland trilogy, and we know that the next film is going to be him with Hulk and apparently Punisher and some variety of forces, Scorpion. But imagine if we get this second trilogy, and in the fourth movie, right, he's saving people, right, defeats Scorpion. Fifth one, it could be some other new threat. Sixth one, whatever, and all in the background of this, just Norman under some fake name, making this villain, making this threats, doing all these things in the background of just, he will not defeat me this time. I'm going to surround myself with like-minded individuals who will owe their allegiance to me. And then when we get to Secret Wars and they see each other again, it writes itself. Like I always say, I am not some great, amazing writer. I am not some creator of wondrous ideas that no one's thought of. I just look at what has been and ask what we can create from there. What ways can we build off of what's occurred previously.